It's not just the Conservatives arguing over Brexit. Labour's shadow Brexit secretary has admitted his party is divided over whether to stay in the EU's single market. Keir Starmer has ruled out measures that would see the UK remain in the European Economic Area, like Norway, and instead proposed an alternative arrangement. Labour will table amendments to the Brexit bill to make maintaining full access to the EU internal market an objective of the negotiations with Brussels. Well, with me, two Labour MPs, Caroline Flint, Europe Minister under Gordon Brown, and Alison McGovern, co-chair of the Labour campaign for the single market. Alison McGovern, what is it you think is the missed opportunity here?
Well, the Labour amendment that has been tabled describes us wanting to fully participate in all the institutions of the internal market, which is basically the single market. So I feel like if we back the Lord's EEA amendment, we get Tory rebels and we've got a chance of beating the government. And I'm just not quite sure what it is that's different about Labour's amendment. So I think the sensible thing to do, we have a pretty good position.
Well, it's because it says the single market, isn't it?
Yeah, but it describes, actually it describes all of the institutions and respecting the rules of the internal market in a way that just looks and feels and sounds like the single market. So I don't see why I'll be supporting that amendment wholeheartedly. I think we should just go one small step further, back the EA amendment, and hopefully, beat the hardline, hard right Tories and make sure that we protect people's jobs and rights in this country.
Caroline Flint, you want the same thing, don't you?
No, we don't. Because to be in the EA, to accept the Norway option, is to basically accept a deal that Norway had to do because it couldn't convince its own public to join the EU. So it is in the single market, and that includes accepting all the rules around freedom of movement, but also on all the other regulations that the EU sets, it has to take those regulations. It has no say. And in the referendum campaign, I'm sure Alison, like myself, when we were campaigning for Remain, we made the case that the Norway option was actually the worst option because you had to accept all the rules and have no say. What Labour is trying to do, and to be fair, what Keir is trying to do, is find some common ground across the Parliamentary Labour Party, but the red lines are that there has to be change to freedom of movement. We accept, and I accept, that we want as much access as possible to the single market, that we will pay into the European Union before we leave what we owe them, and actually in certain areas, whether it's on regulations or common institutions, we probably will take part in that too. But that is completely different from Alison's position, and she's been very clear about this, and I respect her. Alison doesn't want us to leave the EU, and she said that on countless times. And by saying we want to be in the single market and the customs union as is, and she supports the Labour campaign for freedom of movement, she doesn't really want to leave at all.
Well, look,
Your position involves accepting freedom of movement, doesn't it? That's the problem.
I'm perfectly happy that we should reform freedom of movement, and there's many things that we could do ourselves that we haven't done. In Belgium, for example, they require people to register, and they're very proactive at getting people to leave if they haven't got a job. I'm perfectly happy to look at the way that freedom of movement operates, but my question would be about Labour's amendment. It looks like it describes all of the things that I've been talking about in terms of the single market. And it's designed to do that because it's trying to bring us together. So,
but the briefing, as you would admit, the briefing we've been given by the front bench makes it very clear that we want to be as close to the single market as possible, but not be a full member.
What does that mean?
Well, what that means, Alison, is we do not accept the rules around freedom of movement. And the problem is when you say we want to reform it, and don't forget 40% of Remain voters want to change the freedom of movement, we had that opportunity before this referendum, and both Labour and Tory governments failed.
And the fact is, we had a general election last year where Theresa May set out her version of hard Brexit and she lost seats. She didn't gain them.
But we didn't win the election.
No, that's true. We've got a hung parliament.
And to be honest...
We've got a hung parliament.
Look, I respect honesty in this. And the honesty behind those who support the EA. And I think it's a shame because I think actually this amendment divides the Labour Party. Actually, it divides the Parliamentary Labour Party. We could have found common ground around what Keir is trying to do. And instead, the EEA option... If I could say, the EEA option does not allow the sort of control over freedom of movement. And I think it's quite strange in our country that we have freedom of movement for anyone from the EU, but we have very clear restrictions on immigration for anyone else outside the EU.
Isn't the truth that Labour's official position is totally incoherent because you want all the benefits of the single market and the customs union you know, while saying we're going to end freedom of movement. And there's no way that's going to happen.
I think there is a whole load of discussion across Parliament that is confusing for the public. The truth is, and I've said this, between hardline Brexiters and hardline Remainers, there's going to have to be compromise somewhere in the middle. And actually, most of the public, there's no evidence that opinions have changed. They want to feel that we can get the best deal. They recognise their compromise, but these polarised positions just aren't helping.
So you agree that the official position of the Labour Party is
what
nonsense?
I think is,
it's unachievable, isn't it?
No, what I think it is, it's not perfect, I would say that. But the truth is what Keir is trying to do is set out a position. And it's interesting tonight with David Davis, because the Tories have no position whatsoever.
Caroline said before that the EEA option is the worst. That's not the worst. No deal is the worst. Crashing out of the EU without a deal is the worst. I do think it's still right for our country to be part of the European Union. And I'm not ashamed or embarrassed to say so.
But therefore...
Because, can I just finish?
Yes, you may.
Because the way that our modern manufacturing works, we make goods across Europe, not just within our own country. Leaving the single market will be absolutely horrific for employment, especially in the north of England. And we have to accept that whilst there are things that we can do and we must do about immigration in this country, leaving the single market is such a high price to pay.
Alison,
and I simply don't think that those people who make this magical argument about we can get this great bespoke deal are being realistic about
how the EU has operated. It was a bespoke deal for Norway, a bespoke deal for Switzerland, a bespoke deal for Turkey, and there will be a bespoke deal for the United Kingdom as well.
We'll have to leave it there. I hate to butt in. That was really fascinating watching it from the middle. Thank you both very much indeed.